Hey fam, welcome to Big Brother and the Hodling Company, a podcast about music and Web3 trying to fend off Big Brother. I'm McKeegan Voice. Today I spoke with LaTecia Johnson, a creative director and brand strategist who's based in Austin, Texas. She started her career as a songwriter, and over the past decade she has forged a career in tech, creating strategies for household names like Apple, Microsoft, and Nielsen. And more recently, she led strategy for Royal, an on-chain platform for investing in music royalties, where she delivered category-defining partnerships with artists like Diplo, and the Chainsmokers. Now she's gone all in on Visionary Rising, her agency and growth partner for creators and startups and brands. We chatted about all of that, as well as spending a Super Bowl at Diddy's house, the importance of owning your own shit, and all the other stops along her music journey that started at 2 years old in the backseat of her parents' car singing Janet Jackson. Hope you all enjoy the conversation. Here we go. Hey LaTecia, thanks for being here.
Thanks so much. I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely excited to chat again. So as always, I like to start at the beginning and dive a little bit more into where you grew up and when your relationship with music started.
Okay, yeah. So I grew up in Tampa Bay, Florida. It was an amazing town, little beach city. I think I have a story. My parents have a story, at least, from seeing me in the backseat of the car and singing Janet Jackson's Rhythm Nation. And I think that's kind of where I was two. And I think that's where my relationship with music began, really. I've kind of always been around music, connected to music, and have expressed myself through music from the time that I was a child until even now. Right. And so I think no one in my life is surprised that I've built my career in a way that's connected to music and creators because that's where it's all started. It's just embedded in me from a child.
Mm, cool. Yeah, starting at the ripe young age of 2. Yeah, way to get after it.
Yeah, yeah.
So what happened after you got caught singing Janet Jackson in the backseat of the car at 2 years old? What happened after that?
I think my parents really just always encouraged me to continue the creative path in high school, middle school, high school, all of it. Writing, music, becoming a songwriter, teaching myself how to play the guitar. Growing up, I think I knew when I turned 18 that I wanted to be in the music industry. I just didn't really know how or what. And lucky enough to move out to Dallas when I was 19. And within, I would say, 6 months of being there, connected with some people who were already within the music industry and were pushing themselves forward. Because Dallas back then, I'm not going to age myself, but when I moved
Hmm.
out there, it was even more interconnected, I think, than what people know of with the Dallas music scene being what it is today. And I was lucky enough to be connected to people there as soon as I moved out. And through that process was able to sign a development deal with the
Hmm.
label. As a songwriter, myself and a few other people, we were able to start our business and start to develop and generate ideas around music and really pushing ourselves forward. The deal didn't work out. It's the age old story.
Hmm.
Sign a deal, it's a horrible deal. You're young, you don't realize it until you're a little bit older
Hmm.
that, hey, some of this stuff isn't mathing. The math isn't mathing. And so I started asking questions. What is this? Where are royalties? What's going on? And I think, especially at the age that I was at, 22, 23, a lot of, I think, my peers felt, why can't you just be happy? We're getting all of these things, we're getting flown out. We spent time at Diddy's house for the football Super Bowl in Miami. The everyone comes to Dallas for the Super Bowl in 2009. We're
Hmm.
all over everywhere. And I think for me, it was just that moment of, hey, I signed this deal when I was really young. I don't really know a lot about business, but I feel like we should be seeing a lot more, especially if
Hmm.
we're hearing like our demos and stuff all over the radio.
Yeah.
And I got a real crash course of the music industry and the music business at that age before I kind of took a break and transitioned away to figure out what my next steps looked like.
So what kind of music were you making at the time?
It was just songwriting, mostly
Mm,
hooks for others, working on a couple of, like, R&B, soul projects as well.
mm,
Mostly, though, like, I think during that time, song hooks for rap music was very popular, and
mhm.
so that became, like, the bread and butter, and working a lot with a lot of different artists and doing demos and figuring that out was the type of music that I was making through the development deal.
Cool. Yeah, and you mentioned that some of the people that you were working with were okay to sacrifice some of those earnings, maybe caught up in some of the glitz and the glam of the places you were going and the people you were interacting with. Um, did that continue to be the case for them, even as you were starting to see through that and understand the reality of how the industry worked and this wasn't a good deal? Or did they come around as well eventually?
I think it was for me, music was always a catalyst. I always saw music as the catalyst for the next thing. I'm a huge Jay-Z fan,
Mm,
and Jay-Z always says, I gave you the blueprint, follow this.
mm,
And so I was looking at it from the perspective of music is a tool to get us to the next thing. It allows us to diversify all
mm,
of the other things. Thinking about how can we take the progress that we're making from the music catalog and transition that into a clothing line, a lifestyle clothing line. And then we take that and we actually transition it into a creative studio where we take the
mm,
information that we're learning and we do it for other people. We're recording our own videos, we're doing our own management stuff. Why don't we do that for others?
mm,
And that was my vision back then. And I think that even though a lot of people, my peers, saw that vision, I think that taking the risk was a little bit harder for them
mm.
than it was for me because for me, music, as much as I loved it, was always just the doorway into everything else. It
Got it.
wasn't the end all be all for me.
Interesting. Okay, cool. That makes sense. So at the point when you became fed up and you were ready to take a step back and pursue other things, was that kind of part of your blueprint as you'd imagined it? It was like, okay, I've done this with this music. Now I'm ready to start to build on top of that. Was that the idea?
Yeah, that was the idea, and I think one of the first things that I did in transitioning out of it was, like, start a clothing line, and really, the clothing line within 2 years, we were getting, like, 20,000 orders a month. I started
Wow.
a blog from that, and we were just really building from there, and a lot of people were wearing it. We were all over MTV, and it really taught me the importance of just, like, distribution and access. So because I was a songwriter and I had access to a lot of different people, I was able to use those relationships to say, "Hey, can you wear this? This person wears it. Take a picture, put it on
Hmm.
Instagram. Hey, link back to the website." And they're buying it. And so was able to do that really quickly and grow up to a space, like I said, in within a couple of years, getting 20,000 orders per month, but
Wow.
that also taught me that it's cool, but that's not the business that I wanted. I didn't do it because I really wanted to do it. I did it because it was just like the next step for me. I wanted to own my own business. I wanted to learn how to manage and maintain things. And because I'd spent so much time in the music industry, all of the jobs that I was like trying to apply to were more marketing centric, technology centric. And no one would hire me because I didn't really have the resume. So I hired myself. And like that clothing line was my proof of concept. That clothing line was like, hey, you won't hire me, but I know these skills. I was able to do this. And then that kind of opened the door to a lot of the other things that I eventually ended up doing.
So yeah, talk a little bit more about you hiring yourself. So at what point were you able to enable that? And at what point did it start to feel, okay, this is what I want to be doing? Everything that I've been doing till now has been building up to this.
Yeah, I think I am gonna date myself now. So I moved back to Tampa in 2011, and I moved back with 2 suitcases and a laptop. And my parents were like, "Hey, get it together, figure out what you wanna do next." I'd taken some time off and to pursue my music career, and my thing with my parents was like, "If you let me do this and it doesn't work out, I'll come back to Tampa and I'll try it your way."
Mm.
And so went back to Tampa and re-enrolled in school. Before it was the cool thing to do was doing online schooling, and was really thinking about if my work is going to be something that I dedicate a significant amount of time to, it needs to be something that I love as much as music, or that I could grow to love as much as music. And
Mm.
so what are those things? And for me, it was like I always had an interest in technology. I always had an interest in marketing. I don't really know how these 2 come together, but I wanna commit to, like, figuring it out. And so, one of the first things that I did, like, for the clothing line, this was around the time that Wix was just starting out, reached out to Wix and was like, "Hey, I see you have this program. I'd like to be a beta user to see if I can build content and stuff on your platform," and started building taught myself how to code, no code, how to do no code websites, and then just gradually continued to build up from there and started to put together the framework. Really, launching a clothing line was because I didn't have a lot of money. And it was like, if you're going to launch a product, what is the easiest thing that you can do? You can create the designs, you can create a no code website for $20 with the domain, and you can upload these designs into this website that allows people to purchase before you even have to buy the inventory. And so it was first out of necessity, because it's like, how can I make money and do things that I love? But then also, how can I utilize the skills that I'm learning to transfer those into the jobs that I actually eventually want? And that's how it started for me.
Cool. Makes sense. Once you dived into it and you figured out a bit how you could integrate your passions for technology and marketing, and once you started to glean more insights into these worlds, what emerged as something potentially that you could love like as much as you love music?
I think for me, it's always been strategy. I see things differently than everyone else. And that was something that I kind of really learned early. And when I did start to transition, and one of my first jobs was working as a consultant at Microsoft and on their ad stuff. And most of the people at that time were like, they had interned, they were on that track, they were engineering, they thought a certain way. But because I had a different experience, because I was a creator first, because I was a music person first, and I'd spent a lot of time around a lot of creatives, the way that I approached things was with that view in mind, and always with the creative in mind. And so I just ended up having a really good knack for strategy and strategic vision. I didn't know that's what it was called at the time. It was just something that I'd always innately done. If someone tells me something that they want to do, I just see it. I see how the pieces can come together. I go and I do the research, and it's like, oh, yeah, okay, this is exactly what you need to do next. And it was something that I'd always done and didn't know what to call it until I started working in that role as a consultant at Microsoft. And the person that was like my manager was like, "Hey, you're working right now as a consultant for being ads and talking small businesses through what their strategy should be to grow their revenue. You should really look at this." And it put me on the path of of brand strategy in growth, in revenue growth, based on things that I was just doing naturally.
Cool. So was that around the time that you had the idea to start your own agency?
No, that didn't come until a couple years later.
Okay.
After Microsoft, I went and worked at Nielsen for a couple of years
Right.
on their mobile measurement platform, and I got to work with a lot of really cool brands, CW, Bacardi, Freeform before they were Freeform, when they were still ABC Family. I worked through the whole transition of that, worked with ABC, Viacom. So really got the experience of working with global brands and
Mhm.
their teams on building out kind of their digital approach. And one of the things that I realized in those conversations is that people were always talking about a certain demographic, right? They were always talking about either Black creators or Black people. And yet I was like one of the few people in the room who actually met that demographic and actually could speak to a lot of the things that they were trying to do. And so after talking to one of my mentors, right, like at that time, and it's still a factor today, but like less than 3% of decision makers in the agency world, in the advertising world, are Black.
Mm.
It's increased over the last couple of years, but back in 2014, 2015, that was the reality. And so one of my mentors said to me, like, you could either stay here and continue to complain about the injustices, or you could become a part of the solution. And that kind of planted the seed for me. But I didn't really know how to run an agency. I'd been freelancing for a bit as a side hustle, and I'd worked at Nielsen, which is a large company, and had that support. And I was missing the agency support. So, one of the next things that I did was go and work at an agency as a strategist for a year and a half to really learn how do you run an agency? How do you go out and approach and pitch business and all of those pieces that I was missing. And then after about a year of doing that, in 2016, I was like, you know what? Now it's time. I have this, I have the brand strategy, I have the format, I have the agency. Now it's time to kind of transition into trying to do it on my own and working with creators to help them build out their strategies.
Cool. That's amazing. So once you did take that step and start your own agency, how did that feel?
It felt great and scary. Great because I was my own person. Scary because even though I had a holistic view of things, I thought probably, and I know now this was the wrong approach, but I thought that in order to do it, I had to go all in, which meant because that's what everyone was saying, right? Save
Mm,
your money. And if you're going to commit
mm,
and go all in, and I really regret that I did that in the way that I did it because I wish that, like, looking back, I would have probably done it as a side hustle a little bit longer before taking that 1 year to dive all in.
mm.
Because even though, like, I loved it, that first year in business was a lot, and it was a lot, and so I wish that I kind of did have that safety net of having the full-time role and having that consistency as I'm building up to then kinda transition into something full-time. Because one of the things that I learned then is, like, working with creators in the way that our my business was positioned back then, is that working with creators is amazing, but it's going to be a little bit inconsistent at first unless you can work with them at scale. One of the stories that I tell all the time is, like, when I launched the agency in 2016, our service offering was like a $1,500 package, right? And it was primarily focused on creators. The years since, we now work with brands and startups and all those things. And so launching with a $1,500 package for creators and then building up the agency to the point that, like, our brand and our startup engagements at minimum start at 100,000 per year. It's that was the missing piece. But in that first year, I thought I want to make sure that it's accessible to creators and that they get the information that they need. But at the same time, in order to make $1,500 work with your living expenses and managing a team and other freelancers, you have to do it at scale. And
Totally.
the market that I was in just didn't have it just wasn't scalable. It wasn't scalable in the marketplace in the way that I was doing it.
Who were some of the first creators that you started working with? And at the time, what were some of the pain points that you were working through? What were some of the strategies that you were applying? What came as part of this package?
Yeah, I think it was always in not much has changed, but it's been like it's brand positioning. It's
Mhm.
positioning as an artist, regardless of what artists say. When they come to me, it always comes back down to positioning is how do you position yourself in the marketplace? It's not necessarily about being competing with the larger artists, right? If you are an usher, you don't need to you don't need to be like Usher, right? If you want to be the usher in your space, you don't need to be like Usher. But a lot of artists, what I found then and is applicable now, is they struggle with defining their own voice, defining their own sound, defining their approach, because they get trapped into this is what the industry is doing. So
Mhm.
this is what I have to do. The industry releases on Friday, so I release my music on Friday. why would you ever compete with Drake on a Friday? Ever, as an
Yeah,
independent artist. Like,
right.
Drake and the label have an unlimited budget. Why would you ever do that? And so
Mm,
that's a lot of the things that we work with them through, that I worked with them through then and work with them through now, is making sure that your website is where it needs to be, making
mm,
sure that all of your links link back to where you are so people can find you, setting up your newsletter, making sure that if someone is looking for you and someone finds a song on Spotify or Apple Music, that they have a clear path back to a channel that you own so that
mhm.
you can then nurture that relationship, take it to the next level.
Totally. That seems like a good segue to start talking about Web3.
Oh, yeah.
So in between your stints with your own agency, you had a year or so where you went to Royal. And we'd love to hear at first if you could just give a brief kind of description of what Royal is for the people listening who might not know, and then talk a little bit about like how you became involved, what was happening with Royal when you did become involved, and what the process was like of carrying it through to market.
Yeah, I'll definitely talk about Royal. I think part of like me launching in year one for the agency, I did also have a stint where I worked for Apple for a number of years. They saw the work that I was doing through the agency and recruited me to lead a lot of their artists and global initiatives
Mm,
within Apple itself. And so from 2017 through about 2020, I spent within the Apple ecosystem. And then when it comes, things shift and they change. And I think I started to look around and question for myself, what's next, right? What do I want to do? I've done all of these things. What do I want to do next? Where's the world going? And I've spent a lot of time in larger companies running my agency on the side and thinking through like, how do I bring these worlds together? On the one side, my career has taken this like really operational rigor, effectiveness, strategic vision. I see the future. And then on the other side, I'm still deeply involved in the creator ecosystem and working with brands and creators to build their strategies. So how do I bring all of those together? And so Royal is is a marketplace that allows artists to sell portions of their royalties through digital assets, also known as NFTs. I know that's a dirty word right now, but that's essentially what it is, right? And I was approached by Royal to come in and lead their go-to-market strategy. And really in the beginning, it was like it was just an idea, right? It was just an idea of, hey, we are about to build this technology that allows artists to sell a portion of their masters directly to fans, and it allows them to capitalize on the monetization that they're creating, which is really the ethos that I've kind of built my career around because of my experience of being an artist, being a songwriter to a label. They own the master, they get to exploit the master. None of that money really comes back to me because I took an advance. And so, without understanding that structure, I completely shifted my thought and a process throughout my an approach throughout my career. And working with smaller artists, it was always own your shit. Excuse my language, but
no, no worries. You can say
it's
shit.
about own your shit, own it, make sure that it's yours. And then if you decide to sell it, you sell it, but at least you are leveraging your IP as you're building, as you're growing, without turning it over, being informed. And Royal, I think, was really great. And why I was attracted to the project is because it did give artists the opportunities to really take ownership of their career and ownership essentially of the relationship with their fans, in the sense that now we can be partners in this journey. And if I don't want to sign to a label, I don't have to. But if I do, then I've only given up one song as opposed to my entire catalog. And the options are a little different.
So at that time when you were contacted by Royal, did you already know, had you already dipped your toes into Web3 at all? Were you aware of the ecosystem? What was your education level at that point, or like how much of the on-ramp was still ahead of you?
Yeah, I'd spent about six months prior to being contacted by Royal. I spent some time as an entrepreneur in residence at Decent Labs, which is a Web3 accelerator, I think one of the leading ones in the space. And I was uh, advising people who were building, founders who were building in Web3, how to build their companies with the information that I had just from my experience in my career, and then taking their idea and hearing out their idea and then giving them like, this is what you need to do as a founder. And so I got experience and exposure to a wide array of Web3 projects within that space. I think I can say it like a couple, like Art World, decent music, a lot of really great platforms that I was able to advise through their process. And so with that, I started to get like a true on ramp into not only like Web3, but Web3 as a tool for creators and how that plays into it. And I think that is my profile is what attracted Royal to me. The fact that I had the music background, the fact that I had the deeply technical background, having worked with Apple and Microsoft and Nielsen. And then also, I'd spent 6 months really advising founders of these great projects how to build their projects and understand the space and grow it to the next level. And I think the profile that I had was exactly what they were looking for in
Mm,
terms of someone who would be able to like understand the landscape of where we're at, but also be a part of setting that vision for what we could become.
absolutely. So once you were bought in to the Royal Vision and you came on board and started to leverage your experience cross tech and cross building strategy, how did that process come together? How did it evolve from there?
I think everything starts, and this is really with anything that I approach. I think everything starts with an idea and a framework of, hey, we want to be able to pay royalties on chain, something that prior to Royal doing had never been done. And so then it's working backwards. If we want to pay out royalties on chain, what are the things that we need to do? Who are the pieces of the puzzle that need to be bought into this process? It's
Mm,
not just the artist and their team. It's also the publisher, right? It's also the label or the distributor who's issuing the royalties. It's also, in some ways, the PROs, right? It's like all of these things that need to happen in order for us to accomplish something as seemingly simple as paying out collectors on chain. But when you think about the fact that the royalty space is one of the more antiquated parts of the music
mm,
industry. I know some producers who still haven't been paid out their points on records, and yet Royal has done multiple payouts to their collectors in the years since we've done it. And so when I got there, none of those things had been done. None of those things have been done yet. And so setting that operational rigor, setting up the processes and the systems that are going to get us from, hey, someone is interested, all the way through to now we're able to pay out this royalty. And so I really took an end to end approach to how do we do something as complicated as this, but make it as seamless as possible. And of course, Royal has an amazing engineering team as well, great product team. So we all came together to think through how do we do this and how we do it in a way that makes it easy for everyone.
totally. When you first uh, were beginning to actually have conversations with artists and people to bring them on board once you had kind of the rails in place, it's really difficult to communicate this even today. This is a couple years in, and it's still really difficult to communicate what's happening and what this is and what this means to people who haven't interacted with this before. There's plenty of stigma in the Web3 space. I think oftentimes for good reason. There are a lot of scams and various other things. As you said earlier, NFT has become a dirty word. How difficult was it when you started having conversations with artists as the first use cases for what you're trying to prove?
I don't think it was really that difficult because one of the things that I focus on, and I think Royal took this approach very early on, is to not necessarily focus on Web3
Mm,
or blockchain or NFT or kind of all of those things. What I really focus on in my conversations that I have now as well, and even how I'm building out Visionary, it is with this understanding of the technology doesn't necessarily, you don't need to know how the car works, right? Think
Hmm.
about an air conditioner, the invention of the air conditioner. You don't think about that a compressor has to kick on to pump the air. All they was, I'm hot and I turn on the AC and I'm
And then I
cold
feel better.
and I feel better, right?
Yeah.
Or I'm cold and I turn on the heater and I'm heated. And so I think about blockchain in that same way. For artists, it's not necessarily what is happening behind the scenes. It's like Royal is solving a problem, and platforms like Royal are solving a problem of maybe monetization. And so we focus on the problem that it's trying to solve and not necessarily how it gets solved. And that was really the overall strategy, is let's focus on what we're solving and who we're solving it for. And so in those conversations with the artists that we were having, that we ended up eventually closing and doing really great work with, it's like, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? All right, is it communication with your audience? Is it having a deeper connection? Okay, great. Let's build out something around that, right? Whatever it is that you're trying to solve, let's focus on solving that, and then everything else becomes secondary.
Yeah, I think that's certainly the way to go about it. And I think it's been the pitfall of a lot of organizations leading with the technology first. And it still feels the Web3 does that in general, is still leading
Mhm.
with the technology first rather than the benefits of the technology. As you said, you don't have to know how a car works in order to drive one. It's very intuitive to understand all the benefits you're getting from having a vehicle. So I'm curious, talking about something that's happened a little more recently, to get your thoughts on the Rihanna drop. And I'm putting that in quotes because it wasn't really a Rihanna drop, even though it was connected to her music, but the one that happened on another block, which is also oriented around royalties. And yeah, I'm just curious to get your high level thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think high level, right? I love what Another Block is doing in terms of opening up opportunities to all of the rights holders on a song. When you think about the music industry as a whole, right? Songwriters are locked in a battle right now to get more distribution and more notice on what their share of publishing is and what their share of songs are. Producers historically, especially within, not necessarily on that song that you're talking about, but historically within the context of the music industry, producers are paid last, songwriters are paid less. And the primary kind of share of a song's rights and things goes to the rights holders, the primary rights holders, artists, and labels. And so I think a platform that allows all rights holders, regardless of how many points you have on a song, participate or potentially participate in it, I think it's a good thing for the industry as a whole, because it, a lot of times you're not going to push things forward by going the safe route, right? So I think it's a really great test. It's a testament to that question of just sell without the artist necessarily being involved. And I
Mm.
think what that type of play does and approach does is like it answers that question. If you're truly, if the song is good and the product that's being issued is good, should it matter that it came from the producer who rightfully was able to sell a portion of the proceeds that he got from his IP, because it's still his IP. He was a part of the
Yeah,
creation of the song. He was a part of the creation of that song. And so if he wants to cash in on that, why shouldn't he be able to?
totally. Yeah, and just to contextualize this whole thing, a couple weeks ago, there was a Rihanna song, Bitch Better Have My Money, which most people probably have heard. And there was a lot of talk going around the ecosystem about the Rihanna drop, but Rihanna herself didn't really have anything to do with this particular NFT drop. It was one of the song's four credited producers, who actually sold a percentage of his future streaming royalties on his percentage of the master rights to the song. So yeah, as you were saying, LaTecia, I feel like it's a good experiment in the space that is enabling other people, especially now. There's like a Beyonce song that has like 24 people who are
24
credited.
people on it. Yeah.
Yeah, like those people should also be able to use their IP to their advantage when they need to.
I
Um,
agree, and I think that's the reason that the larger artists give that share to the
mm,
artists, is for them to participate in the future revenue of the song. Because every artist, especially a major artist, understands that the music that they're creating, they may not capture the full revenue potential for that song within the first year, within the first 2 years, because a longer term play is on the exploitation of the master over the long haul. And so by including the rights holders on it, by including the producers and the songwriters and on the points, and to even break it down even further, what are points on a record, right? To contextualize it, points on a record are percentages that are given to creators on the song. And for example, you'll have 100 points that are available to be distributed on the master side of the record. And so as a creator, you'll get a point of that. You'll get 5 points, maybe 10 points, however it's divided up. And then of those 10 points, when revenue is generated, you receive your percentage based on the points that you have. And so I do think that as we're moving into the future, opportunities where all rights holders, not just the label, not just the primary person,
mm.
not just the performing artist, can continue to benefit from the opportunities that are present. I think it's just a good thing for the space and for music as a whole.
Absolutely, I agree. It's putting a lot more agency back into more people's hands. As you said earlier, own your shit. And
Exactly.
and that's the advantage. And hopefully with this technology that is further empowering that agency for more people. And speaking of agency, to go back to your agency, would love to talk about the transition back and away from Royal and why you made that decision to, at this point, go all in on your agency.
Yeah, I think I was hired at Royal when it was at zero, right? It was like, and the idea was like 0 to 1, 2 to 5. And the one being market launch of the marketplace and the realization of that. And that happened in November of last year. And I think for me, it was one of those thoughts of, this is something that I've created and it's amazing and it's good. And I've been a part of creating this. It's going to advance the space. But going back to the reason that I started down this path in the first place was the expansion of the creator ecosystem, and to truly ensure that creators are empowered to make informed decisions with what's developing. And I think when we think about Web 2 and Web 3 and the promise of Web 3, for me, what's wrong with the music industry or what needs to be fixed is like there currently are four major major labels within the music industry that really set the tone for what happens, how legislator gets granted, what are the percentage of the artists. Everyone has a problem with Spotify. I don't believe that it's truly a Spotify issue.
Hmm.
I think it's the major players. And I think that with Web3, if we are to truly change and to challenge, we can't have that same ecosystem. It can't just be one primary player that is way more successful than all of the other players. And because of
Mm.
that success, and because of the amount of money that was raised, and because of all of these other factors, they're able to set they alone are able to set the trajectory for the space. And so I was at the point where I felt like the work there has been good, but if I am to do my greatest work, what does my greatest work look like? And I think the more that kept asking myself that question, the more that I came back to the space of, you already have that framework there. You started it in 2016. You've been a part of it for a couple of years. You've done it in the side. If not now, when?
Mm.
And what does that vision look like? All of these things that I've done in my career, all of now these connections that I've made, the career that I've built, this is an opportunity to really go in on that model. It doesn't mean that I may not take another opportunity if it comes along, but it's giving yourself that freedom and that flexibility to lean back into the thing that it has been there all along for a reason.
Cool. Yeah, how has that felt the first time? It feels like there was hesitation initially, but it feels, given all that you've done, it's like a more mature moment to hire yourself again. And I'm curious how that's feeling and how things are going. Who are you working with? What What is most exciting to you right now about this new journey?
Yeah, I think it's been really good. It feels really good. I've built a team over the years, who've been like fully committed to the vision of Visionary Rising. And they've worked and I was still working in the agency, just not on a full-time capacity. I was working kind of 9 to 5 in my tech career, and then 5 to 9 and on the studio and the agency. And I think stepping back into it, having the understanding of all of the things that I have seen over the last 6, 7 years, stepping back into it and getting with the team and saying, hey, this is the vision that I have for the future. And it's to build a studio that's a protocol. And yeah, that definitely comes from Web3, but with the idea that we don't have to be a traditional agency. I don't have to only serve this thing or only do this thing. We can be a growth partner, and I can build a team of freelancers and people who are completely committed to this version, but also work in a way that is the most effective for them and feels good to them. And also their growth is unlimited, and they have a clear pathway to being able to launch their own hub if they want to learn under me for a year, get all of the details and the things that they need, but then go off and launch their own agency, launch their own studio where they can become a partner. And that has been the most exciting thing, is thinking through, there aren't a lot of studios right now who are, I think, serving the needs of, as a growth partner, that means that I'm solely committed to helping you to grow. That may mean looking at your creative and getting you like the dopest creative in the world. We have someone on our team who was the former head of creative for Netflix Global. And so if you want a dope brand, I can get that for you. But if you want to just focus on your revenue growth and your trajectory and your strategy, I can also do that for you. And just looking at that as a whole. And so I'm most excited about the brands who and startups who've approached us and are like, hey, we believe in what you're doing. And this is also an ecosystem that we want to build, and we want to partner in figuring out how this takes shape. And then also, I don't know when this is going to come out, so this may be a little bit early, but we're in the process of partnering with a global creator community who has about 9,000 music artists globally, and we'll be providing services for these artists and creating a streamlined way for them to get the media kits that they need, to get strategy that they need, streaming strategy. We have a lot of kind of technology partners that we'll be diving into partnering with to ensure that as creators come in, that they're able to build the tech stack that they need to be successful, and also get the support that they need to understand how to approach their growth in
Mm.
Web 2 and then build their community in Web 3.
Cool. That's really exciting. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm excited to hear more about that and to watch that evolve. And I just have one more question for you, and it's something I ask everybody. You're going to a desert island. You get to bring 3 albums with you. What are they?
Ooh, man. Damn, this is good. 3 albums: The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill,
Nice.
Songs About Jane, Maroon 5's
Mm,
first album,
cool.
and 444.
Nice. Good
Those are my
selection.
three.
That was quick.
Those are my three. Those are my three, because each of them speak to a different phase and stage in my life. And those, I would say, are my top 3 albums.
Cool. Man, that was really quick. It was like you knew I was going to ask you
I had no idea.
that. Cool. Okay. Okay. I believe you. Um, cool. LaTecia, it's been really great to chat. Last thing, what's the best place for people listening to follow you, to get involved, and to keep track of all the things you're doing?
Sure thing. The best place to visit me is going to be on either Instagram or Twitter. LaTecia Rising, LaTecia Rising, across everything. And then also, if you want to catch up on what the studio is doing, follow us at Visionary Rising across everything.
Cool. Cool. Awesome, LaTecia. It's been great to have you here. Thank you again so much for your time.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Take care. Wishing you the best. All right, that's it for this episode of Big Brother and the Hodling Company. I'm your host, McKeegan Voice, and you can keep up with me and all the latest Web3 music trends on Twitter at McKeegan. That's MACEAGON. This show is a production of Decentral Media, and you can visit us at decentral.io. And remember, only you can prevent and fend off Big Brother.